Welcome back to this exciting Dartmouth event, more than 1,000 strong. We have another great conversation with two very important people from different political parties, but who have been working together on bipartisan energy legislation. First, U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat of New Hampshire, and great friend of Dartmouth. Senator Shaheen sits on the Senate Foreign Relations, Appropriations, Armed Services, and Small Business Committees. Second, Senator Rob Portman, Republican of Ohio, and Dartmouth class of 1978. Senator Portman is a member of Foreign Relations, Finance, and the Homeland Security Committees. And let me add that Senator Portman is a longtime Dartmouth personal friend and colleague, both kayaking some great rivers of the world together and advancing clean energy in Congress. And clean energy and climate are my passions, serving in the Clinton and Obama administrations, including as Assistant Secretary of Energy and Department of Energy Chief of Staff, directing Google's climate and energy programs, launching 2 investment funds focused on low carbon energy projects, and leading a center at Stanford at the business and law schools on energy policy and finance. Turning to our great audience, if you have questions for our guests, please use the Q&A feature. And now turning to our eminent guests, let's start with a burning question for the budding politicians in this virtual room. Senator Shaheen and Portman, what led you to become senators? Senator Shaheen.
Well, I have this theory that as some people are born with artistic ability and some people can sing, some of us get the political gene, and I just happen to get the political gene. But I think seriously, I came of age in the 60s when there was so much political turmoil going on in the country. If you weren't interested in politics, you weren't paying attention. And then I had the good fortune to marry someone from New Hampshire, move to the state, and get involved in the presidential primary working for Jimmy Carter back in 1975. We went to the first campaign meeting that Jimmy Carter had in the state, and he became president. Who would have thought? And that was really the start for me.
And Senator Portman. Thank you, Senator Shaheen.
Well, Dan, first of all, when you asked us to do this, you promised that we could come to Hanover. So I feel like we've been shortchanged. But I'm sure it's a beautiful day on the Hanover Plain. I blame Dartmouth for sending me down this dark path of politics. When I was at Dartmouth, I took my time. I was on the 5-year plan. It was kind of the remedial plan. But you can still do that, apparently, at Dartmouth, because I think your son is on his 5-year plan now, Dan. But that resulted in me being able to do some other things that were interesting, including working for my congressman. When I was in the fall of my sophomore year, I went to Ohio and to Washington to work for then U.S. Representative Bill Gradison. And I just liked him. I liked what he did. I didn't know that I was particularly Republican or Democrat or independent. I just really respected him, and I dug into it more. And then later in my Dartmouth career, Dan and I kayaked down the Rio Grande for 6 months, somehow got credit for some of that, including I went back and got an undergraduate grant from Dartmouth to be able to study immigration. And along the border, I lived with about 20 Mexican workers on a ranch, and then also rode with the Border Patrol, and ended up getting a job in Washington when I graduated on immigration policy. So again, goes back to the Dartmouth plan and Dartmouth encouraging me to try new and different things. And ever since then, I've been involved with policy and government. And as I look at this career, I have just decided not to run again. And I looked at how many years I've been doing this. It's been 30 years in 4 different administrations, and in 12 years in the House, 12 years in the Senate when I finish up the next 2 years. So it's I never intended to be in public service as long as I have, but it's a way to help people, and that's what motivates me and motivates Jeanne. And we appreciate your letting us come on today to talk about one of those issues we both care deeply about.
Well, thanks to both of you. And you obviously are both from different parties, but you came together to develop an important piece of energy legislation. Tell us about the Shaheen-Portman bill. What is its objective and its status? How did you come together to work on it? And importantly, why is progress on serious energy policy in the Senate seemingly so much more difficult these days, and climate policy even harder? And what are the prospects for more Senate bipartisanship in these 2 key areas? Senator Shaheen.
Okay, I was going to have Rob go first on this one, but
all right, good. Senator Portman.
Well, let me just say it's been really great working with Jeanne. We've been doing this for 10 years together. When we both realized that there is a great opportunity to find bipartisanship in energy efficiency. We put together a bill working with a number of outside groups, and it focuses on three big areas. One is the federal government itself. The largest energy user in the world is our US federal government. And although we're great at preaching to people and telling them what to do, the federal government itself is very inefficient. And so our bill mandates that the federal government be far more efficient in terms of its call centers and in terms of its buildings, a huge footprint, in terms of its vehicles and so on. So it would be a great help. And then second, manufacturing. As we looked at this, we realized that our manufacturers could use some help in terms of becoming more energy efficient to compete with Japan, compete with the EU, compete with developing countries that are learning how to produce things at a lower cost, in part through energy efficiency. So it's partly to reduce emissions, but honestly, partly for our competitiveness. And we've gotten a great response from the business community as a result. We have over 120 business organizations or businesses supporting our legislation. And then the final one is buildings. And this is where the most progress can be made. And frankly, it's where we have been a little bit stymied. We have passed a number of our pieces of legislation over the past 10 years. And the whole bill has passed the United States Senate before, and it's come out of committee, I think 6 or 7 times. But on the building side, we've had a little difficulty making the progress that we would like. And specifically, we want to put out more information on building codes so we can improve building codes around the country. And the home builders have pushed back pretty hard on that. But we really believe that that's core to the legislation. We continue to fight for it. And the notion is that if we can just have a slight increase in the efficiency of homes and commercial buildings, and other buildings, that you would see a huge reduction in carbon emissions and great progress on efficiency. 40% of the energy we use in this country is in our buildings. So that's kind of the core of Shaheen Portman. Again, we've gotten a lot of it passed over time, but we're still working hard to get this final piece done. And we're introducing our new legislation here in the next couple of weeks.
So Senator Shaheen, what about trying to get to this bipartisan agreement and getting it through the whole Congress?
Well, as Rob says, this bill has gotten through the Senate a number of times, and a version of it has gotten through the House. We've never gotten the right version through both bodies in the same year. But I started working on this because I had worked on energy efficiency as governor, and I saw the benefits both in terms of the pollution saved, the dollars saved because of costs, and the jobs that could be created in. And I think that's what our bill is all about. And when we started working on it, Rob had just gotten elected, and I was on the Energy Committee, and we started looking at Republicans who might be partners on the Energy Committee who were going to be serving. And actually, it was because Rob had been to Dartmouth, and one of your other famous graduates, Annie McLean Custer, and he had been friends. And I talked to Annie, I said, so tell me about Rob, what do you know? And she said, oh, he would be a great partner. So we contacted him, and of course he has been a great partner, and we have been very collaborative on this legislation. And as he says, the real challenge has been getting the building code section through because of the home builders. They've decided that even though those building codes that would save so much energy are not mandatory, they're only voluntary, they are still opposing them. And that's been very frustrating because, as Rob says, we've gotten a number of provisions of the bill done, but the savings there are significant, particularly in places like New England, where so much of our housing stock and our commercial buildings are quite old. If we could improve the efficiency in our buildings and help with retrofits, which I think is something that we can do through infrastructure improvements, then we can make a huge difference in energy savings. And our bill by 2050 would save 1.2 billion tons of emissions and save consumers about $42 billion a year, plus create tens of thousands of jobs. So this is a win-win for everyone. It's something that most of us, whether we're from oil producing states or from states where solar and energy or solar and wind make sense, can support efficiency. And that's one of the things that I like about it. And it's really, again, so disappointing to me that we've seen one advocacy organization be so opposed to getting this done.
So Rob, do you want to add something?
Well, I just want to add to what Jeanne just said, because when you look at the equivalency of 1.3 billion tons, that's the equivalent of taking 280 million cars off the road for a year. So these are significant savings. And again, it doesn't lose a single job. In fact, it adds jobs. We have a study showing it will add over 100,000 new jobs, and you can imagine why. This is a lot of retrofitting and good work. So it's, you know, it's exactly what we should be doing. It is a bipartisan approach. It's one where a lot of Republicans can get on board, as well as Democrats, to talk about how we reduce emissions, improve the economy. And in the process, you know, Jeanne and I have worked on other things as well. So it's been a good opportunity to work with Jeanne on something that's very bipartisan, and then work on some broader issues together. We're both on the Climate Caucus, which is a bipartisan group looking at various ideas to reduce emissions. And our legislation is a great example of that.
And energy efficiency is the cheapest, fastest way to deal with our energy needs. It's the low-hanging fruit, and we still aren't doing what we should be doing to take advantage of that. And we've got so much more opportunity here that we should be working on.
And I would just add, it's low-hanging fruit that grows back. We're always inventing new energy efficiency technology. So it's very exciting in that regard. I also wanted to mention that Representative Ann Custer will be with us on Wednesday at this Dartmouth Energy Forum. So an exciting trio here of members of Congress. So let me turn now. You each have very important committee roles. And Senator Portman, you sit on the Senate Finance Committee, which has significant influence on private investment. For example, through the federal tax policy the committee develops. What are some of the important ways your committee is shaping energy and climate-related investment, especially from the private sector, to build a cleaner and more secure energy future?
Well, there are several incentives in the tax code that we've worked on. Obviously, the solar credit and the wind credit are among them. One that I'm particularly excited about is carbon sequestration. And, you know, in Ohio, we are a big producer of energy: natural gas, coal, oil, wind, solar, hydro. We've got it all. And my view is that fossil fuels are going to be with us for some time and be necessary for base load. And so we got to figure out better ways to capture carbon and sequester it. And so there is legislation that has passed. In fact, we just extended it for another 2 years as part of our year-end spending bill last year, called the 45Q tax credit, which I strongly support. But there's new legislation that Senator Bennett from Colorado and I have been working on, and we introduced it about 5 years ago initially. We've refined it since then. In fact, we've added to it, partly because Dan Reicher, on with us today, encouraged us to look at various carbon capture technologies, including direct air capture facilities. And as a result, we've got a bill, I think, that would really work well to encourage utilities to use carbon capture. It's expensive, you know, it can cost about $1 billion to have a first generation carbon capture facility. So we have a private activity bond approach to this. One thing I like about PABs, private activity bonds, it's been used successfully for everything from scrubbers back in the 70s to today, you know, being used in a number of ways in airports, docks, sewage facilities, and so on. But it also gets the private sector more involved, which I think is really important. These should be public-private partnerships. So my hope is that that can be something that the committee works on here over the next year that could be bipartisan. A lot of us come from states that are energy producing states, and we want to be sure that that energy is being produced in as clean a way possible within the efficiencies of the system, so people can have both affordable and reliable energy. And I think carbon capture technology, having taken a while, but now being better developed, is one place where the government can provide some incentives.
That's great. So turning from the private sector to the public sector, Senator Shaheen, you sit on the Senate Appropriations Committee, which funds much of the federal government's spending on energy and climate. What are some of the important ways that your committee is shaping the federal government's energy and climate work to build a cleaner and more secure energy future?
Well, one of the things we know that the president is talking about is trying to incorporate energy policies that address climate change into whatever we're doing. And one of the areas, this is not appropriations, this is really foreign relations, but one of the areas that I've been working on with Bob Menendez from New Jersey is how we integrate those same energy efficiency, energy savings, climate policies into our foreign policy. And we have legislation called the Climate Act, which would provide incentives and programs through all of our, or a number of the ways in which we provide and work with other countries. We have a new development finance corporation that replaced the Overseas Private Investment Corporation to provide incentives for private companies to work in countries overseas, and to provide some incentives and programs through the DFC, through other areas where we provide assistance to countries to ensure that we're trying to focus on policies that will impact climate change, reduce emissions, help other countries figure out how they can also support efforts that improve energy savings. So it's not just in domestic policy that we're looking, but it's also overseas.
That's very, very helpful. You both sit on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, so let me now turn to Senator Portman. You've also done some climate and energy related work through that committee as well. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, there's some great opportunities. And by the way, I should have mentioned nuclear earlier too. We have nuclear in Ohio too, 2 plants and about 20% of our electricity. So again, it's a matter of a mix. And the new technologies on nuclear are actually quite promising, particularly with regard to potential disposal opportunity. So on the Committee of Foreign Relations, we have worked on this thing called the debt for nature swap, where you go to a country and you say, hey, if you're not going to tear down your forests, we'll give you a little break on your debt owed to the United States. It's usually USAID debt or agriculture debt. And it's worked remarkably well. It's believed that the burning of forests is the 3rd or 4th biggest cause of CO2s. So you think about it, what's going on in Brazil today and other places where you have huge swaths of forest being burned, those emissions go into the air and help create some of the CO2 issues that we've had. So this is an opportunity to preserve tropical forests, which are the place where there is the most opportunity here, plant new trees, and ensure that we're doing our best to try to help the environment as well as help the economies of these countries. Because with the debt for nature swap, they get the U.S. debt off their books, which helps them economically. They also get some help from the private sector, because on almost all of our projects, we've had over 20 of them around the world in places, Latin America, Africa, Asia. Almost all of them include the private sector in one way or another, sometimes significantly. So Conservation International, World Wildlife Fund, the Nature Conservancy have all worked with us. Right now, we're working on a project with El Salvador. I spoke to the ambassador recently, a country that needs some help right now. And so, they're excited about it because they get to reduce their debt and work with non-governmental organizations to protect their forests. We have been able to protect 67 million acres of forest. So you think about that, 67 million acres of forest have been protected through this legislation just over the last 10 or 15 years. And that's the equivalent of, being able to sequester tens of millions of tons of carbon. So it's something that has worked without, again, losing a single job, without any big, regulatory mandates. But it's to say to countries around the world, if you'll protect your forests, we'll help you do that. And the result is a significant savings in terms of CO2 emissions.
And we need to do the same thing here at home in New Hampshire, where we're the 2nd most heavily forested state in the country. We need to provide incentives, particularly to private forest owners who control so much of the forest in the state, so that they don't sell off those forests to development. And there are several pieces of legislation that would encourage tree planting, but we also have to provide incentives to private landowners so that they don't sell those forests.
So turning from trees and the ecosystems to people in our own country and around the world, access to affordable, reliable, and clean energy is a real issue for some in the US and worldwide. What we call energy poverty, i.e. no access to electricity at all, remains a serious challenge for more than 1 billion people on the planet. What more can we do to address this significant problem in our own country and also around the globe? To both of you.
I think often we think about energy policy in terms of big projects, dams, nuclear power plants, big wind farms and solar arrays. But so much of what we can do both at home and overseas is really smaller initiatives. It's what each of us can do as we think about our energy use in our own homes. It's about thinking about efficiency. You know, back in 2010, when I was on the Energy Committee, we passed an energy bill that would have invested in modest carbon sequestration. It would have invested in small modular nuclear power plants and a whole range of things. Unfortunately, that bill passed the committee and never made it to the floor. So I think thinking about some of the things that are easier to get done is an important way for us to think about energy efficiency. In New Hampshire, we're looking at wind offshore, and the state of Maine is also looking at that. Those are big projects, and hopefully they're going to go forward. But we also have things like North Conway, where they have a solar array that powers most of their wastewater treatment facility. That's a relatively small project, and yet if we think about the energy use by wastewater treatment in this country, that's 4% of our total energy use. So we need to think about it in our communities, in our own homes, and not as something that has to be this huge project, but something that we can get behind in our communities.
Yeah. Those are great points, Jeanne. Dan, the one thing that I would say to this group is that to the extent people are concerned about climate change, you have to focus on the global picture. And we could make all the strides in the world here, and we'd still have very much a CO2 emission issue, because we are a relatively small part of the problem, and increasingly a small part of the problem. We've actually, over the last 15 years, we've made some progress here, particularly with power plants. Most of that's from conversions from natural gas. Previous coal plants in Ohio are now natural gas plants, as an example, and we have lower emissions as a result. One reason I like sequestration of carbon is that, we need that base load, not just here, but around the world, because you're right, people are going to be looking for more energy for them, for their families, to be able to be economically successful and to follow in our footsteps, where we used an awful lot of energy to get where we are. So I think people have to recognize that to the extent we just focus on the United States in terms of CO2 emissions, we will not be successful in achieving our goals. And so we have to look globally. And by the same token, there's a trend working the other way, which is more and more people wanting to have more and more access to energy, which is understandable, electricity in particular. So it's a challenge. And I think the answer is really pretty obvious, which is technology. And it's in our interest to share the technology we have, and also to work with other countries on their technology, some of which, as Jeanne indicated, might be more suitable for those countries. It might not be a big project. It might be more distributed energy, in India that could involve solar panels or something like that in a village that's cut off otherwise. Or it could be small nuclear power plants, as you say, these modular plants, and this new technology that we mentioned earlier that's coming along that maybe will have better results in terms of the disposal of nuclear waste, which has always been the tough issue there. So I think that technology transfer is really important for us. It's in our interest, it's certainly in their interest. And by the way, China is, they say, building a new coal-fired plant every couple of weeks. Brazil, India, these other countries, they're continuing to burn fossil fuels and do so aggressively. So it's probably the best thing that we could do if we're concerned about CO2 emissions right now. Continue to focus here at home, be a model here, provide our technologies and other technologies as we can to these other countries. And if we don't, then we're gonna lose this global race.
So I'm looking at some of the Q&As coming in from the audience, and one of them is, in fact, yes, we've got to become a model for the world, but what about here at home? So what about climate policy? This is the question. We tried to develop a cap and trade approach through the Waxman-Markey bill. We've discussed a carbon tax. We're debating a national clean energy standard. What about those approaches is the audience question at this point. Where do those potentially fit in?
Well, I was disappointed. I was at the COP21 in Paris back when President Obama agreed to join the Paris Climate Accords. I was disappointed that former President Trump withdrew the United States, and pleased that President Biden put us back in. But as Rob says, obviously, in order to make those effective, we've got to ensure that we're working with other countries to get things done. Here at home, again, I think this administration is looking at all the ways in which we can incorporate climate activities and climate policies into the other work that we're doing, whether it's infrastructure or even as part of the American Rescue Plan, there were some provisions to help address energy policy in that. You know, in the Northeast, we have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, which has worked very well, despite the fact that Waxman-Markey didn't do what everyone had hoped. It never got through the Senate. What we've seen is that that's an initiative that's worked here in the Northeast, and we know there are a lot of things that work. It's building consensus to get those things done, and that's why I suggested that we don't need to think about this as we've got to solve the whole problem with one policy. We should think about what's working in our communities, what's working in our states, what we can support in the United States. We just, with Rob's help, we just had bipartisan support to reverse the rollback during the Trump administration of the methane rules that would have allowed for more burning of methane, which we know and are learning is much more destructive in terms of climate policy than we realized. We were able to overturn that and hopefully go back to those regulations that will allow us to limit the flaring of methane gas into the environment. So in order to do all of these things, however, we've got to work together. And I think that's one of the things that Rob and I have tried to do in a way that I believe has been effective.
And Rob, you've really put a lot of focus recently on infrastructure and the potential there.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, I think Jeanne's right. And I think I would even go further and say, in some respects, it would be best for us to focus on what we can do. And you know, the methane rule is an example of that. And it will make a big difference, I think. And, you know, obviously I'm getting some feedback from the oil and gas industry on that, because it's going to require them to do some different things in terms of avoiding leakage and flaring. But I think that's important. I think we talked about 4 or 5 things today that are really important. Energy efficiency, obviously, as you said, low-hanging fruit that continues to regrow. And we also have an opportunity right now, I think, to do something really interesting on carbon sequestration. And that, to me, developing a market for CO2, developing the infrastructure, the pipelines for CO2, I think is something really interesting. I have a meeting, Jeanne's probably going to be with me next week on some of the new nuclear power technologies. As you know, the United States has been developing some of this. Some of it's done by the private sector. I think Bill Gates has put $1 billion into it. So, you know, he gets an audience with Congress now and again to talk about things like that, and he will be there. So it's, you know, it's kind of looking at these things that really will help. And sometimes the politics of it get in the way when you kind of, you know, go for the big climate change policy all at once, but you can make incremental progress. And we have, and frankly, one reason we've made progress again is we're using more natural gas than coal. And that's, you know, as you look at the 27% reduction I think it is in power plant CO2 emissions over the past, I don't know, 13 or 14 years, that's primarily because of new technologies that have been developed that enables us to burn this cleaner burning fossil fuel. And again, if we could capture that carbon and sequester it and have a market for that CO2, that's an opportunity too. So I think there's lots of opportunity to do more. And our little climate caucus is looking at those sorts of, maybe they're considered to be incremental steps, but in the combination of all of them, in the aggregate, they're going to make a big difference.
So our 30 minutes is up, and so let's give Senator Shaheen and Portman a virtual round of applause for their thoughtful conversation. And importantly, let's wish them luck, and the Senate more generally, in finding more areas of bipartisanship on clean energy and climate. You two have really worked well together and are real models for the Senate. So with that, we thank you.
Dan.
And back
Thank
to our
you.
event
Thank you to
host.
Dartmouth.
Senator, thank you so much. That was great.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. And it was fun, Rob. Next time we'll get them to let us do it in person, hopefully.
I know. Great to be with you, Jeanne. Have a good couple days.
Good to see you. Yes, you too. Have a good week.
See you on Monday. Okay. Take care. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Rob. Talk soon. Had a good chat with Lydia today. We're going to get you some stuff on the hydro front.
Oh, good. Excellent.